Okay, so I just want to do this really quick video looking at this article that was published recently from Denmark. It's receiving some publicity because it shows, according to the writers, that mask wearing may not be as efficacious as believed. So this was conducted in Denmark, and I saw today in the Washington Post on their headline is that some people, anti-maskers, are using this as evidence against wearing masks. Well, first you have to understand when you're in research, you don't rely just on one study. To show causality, we need replication of results. One study is not enough. In fact, studies can be flawed. And of course, a second important determinant is having a randomized controlled trial that is very tight in terms of its control. And this study, even though there was randomization, isn't as tight as it could be because obviously you're dealing with people and you can't monitor them 24 hours a day in a lab. So we can't be sure for that. I will say that the study was pretty well designed other than that, but it has flaws. So you cannot conclude just by using this study that not wearing a mask is better than wearing a mask. And for those of you who do, you obviously don't understand research methods. So I certainly welcome anybody to challenge anything that I say, and you should. You absolutely should. That's what science is about. But let's just take a look at this study. So there's a randomized controlled trial, but not the kind that we would think would be perfect, because again, even though you can randomize individuals to a control group and an experimental group, again, it's not tightly controlled because you can't monitor people 24 hours a day. But people were randomly assigned to the two different groups. One group was following the normal recommendations in Denmark at the time, which did not include wearing masks, and then others that were told to wear masks. Now, again, that's not perfectly easy to make sure that people are complying, so compliance isn't assured. And if you read through the study, you'll see that data show that there was some lack of compliance. I think 47% of individuals complied with the mask wearing recommendation during the study. So again, but I will make clear that the researchers did test differences when with compliance and non-compliance. So they did a very good job, in my view, in terms of the study design. So let me see if we can find some interesting stuff for you. So I go to the results, but what I'm really interested in is, and what I think is the problem here, there's two problems. One is that in order to test whether or not one contracted the coronavirus, there was self-testing done with both the PCR test or the antibody test. An antibody test will involve a blood test. So you had to have individuals know how to read these results themselves, and then pass those results on in a survey to the researchers. That's itself is problematic, because we don't know, first of all, that people can read it correctly, and we don't know if people have motivation to report it as positive or negative, or maybe. So that's hard enough as it is. The sensitivities and specificities of these tests are fine. So for instance, here it says that for this antibody test, the sensitivity is 90.2 and specificity was 99.2. And for this PCR test, it was 82.5 and 99.5 respectively for sensitivity and specificity. We have to look at this as, I'm looking at this as, I don't know if this is the best way to do it. I'm looking at it as net sensitivity, so it's an either or scenario, because you had to test positive on either of the two. So they did this at 1 month follow-up. Everybody had to do it at 1 month follow-up, and with the PCR test, you could do it if you had symptoms. So I treated this as an either-or scenario, and calculated net sensitivity using the addition rule of probability. So you add these two values together, and then you subtract the joint probability. So 0.902 times A25. I'll show you that in a second. And the sensitivities and specificities were fine, so I didn't have any issue with that at all. But the idea that one has to take their own, do their own testing when they're clearly not trained to do that is an issue. So that's something that I worried about a lot. The other issue, and I'm still trying to show you, just scrolling through this. Here it is right here. Here it is. Adherence. Based on the lowest adherence reported in the mask group during follow-up, 46% of participants wore a mask as recommended, 47% predominantly as recommended, and 7% not as recommended. So there wasn't perfect adherence. And again, this is all self-report, so you don't know if that everybody's telling you the truth. However, they did account for this in their calculation, so I'm not going to use this against them in any way. Again, overall, I think the study was done really well for what kind of study it was. But one of the main issues I have is, and they found no difference, just in case you're wondering. Basically, they found no difference in the proportion of individuals who contracted the coronavirus in the group that wore masks and the group that didn't wear masks. They did all kinds of post hoc calculations, including looking at people who lived with individuals who had coronavirus or not. So their results are pretty strong, right? So I have no issue with that. But I do have an issue with the prevalence in Denmark. So if you've been following my videos, I've been calculating prevalence. I basically started, so thankfully I had data. So I had data on the prevalence of the coronavirus in Denmark. So the study was conducted between April and I think June 2nd was the end of the study. So I had data on April 15th, May 15th. I don't have June 2nd, but I have June 8th. After a while, I started getting tired. First, I calculated this stuff every day, and then it was periodically. But you look at the prevalence rates per 100,000 individuals in Denmark, they went down pretty significantly from 66.9. So this is people per 100,000. This compares, it's drastically different from what we see in the United States. I mean, even then we were over 100 something or more per 100,000. So what I did was I took the average. I just had to take the average because we had this decline. So I took the average prevalence to be 33.666. So if I want to know what the probability of one contracting coronavirus, I just divided this by 100,000 because this is per 100,000. So I just divided it by 100,000. And you can see that value is here. So this is the probability of contracting the coronavirus in in Denmark during that period. I'm thinking Denver because I'm thinking of skiing. So it's 0.0003. So if you multiply this by 100, it's 0.03%. So it was very low, right? I calculated the net sensitivity and specificity by what I explained earlier. Specificity is a little different because you have to just test. You have to, so to be considered disease positive, you test positive on either. To be considered disease negative, you have to test positive on negative on all of those tests. So this is a product rule in probability here. So you just multiply the two specificities together. So they're really strong if you look at them. So that's not an issue. I took the N as 4862. That's the total number of individuals who completed the study. I know there were some people who dropped out, but I'm trying to do a quick calculation here. And what I wanted to calculate was the probability of being disease positive given one test positive. So that's called a positive predictive value. And if any of you are interested, this is Bayes' rule or Bayes' formula for calculating PPV. So the values up here, you'll notice this is sensitivity, this is prevalence, that's the sensitivity prevalence. This is actually the total probability of testing positive, which means both true positives and false positives. So this is the false positive probability. So it's one minus the specificity, and I don't have time to explain that now, but I actually have other videos that show that. And this is 1 minus the prevalence. The prevalence is basically the probability of having the coronavirus or the proportion of the population that has it. So it's 1 minus 0.0033666, and I calculate this, and so here's what I get as the probability of having the disease given you test positive. Look at this value. This is very small, right? there's basically a 2.5% chance that you have the disease if you test positive based on these data. So, in public health, we actually focus a lot on PPV because we use that to determine what is worth screening for when we have low prevalence diseases like the coronavirus, especially in Denmark here. It's not really worth screening for it because of this, financially, but of course we're doing it now because there is a pandemic, and obviously the whole world has been, finances have almost been destroyed because of this disease, so yes, we have to screen for it. But this says something else. So these individuals who test positive, they only have like a 2.5% chance of having the disease. So to me, that's just like, I don't know what that tells you in terms of this result, except for that, the prevalence is very low in Denmark. So just that fact alone tells you that the results are probably meaningless from their study. So if you're using it as an argument to stop using masks, you're basically wasting your time. You have to look at the totality of all studies, and there's way more research showing that masks are useful. And those studies are done by engineers and others who actually studying how particulate matter travels through masks. So I kind of trust those right now more than a study that cannot be perfectly designed, although I really want to say that those researchers did an outstanding job based on what they had. All right, thanks, that's all. So just keep on wearing your masks.